Welcome, everyone, to another episode of It Depends podcast series. My name is Sanjeev Mohan. We are very fortunate to have Rahul Pathak. Many of you recognize him, I'm sure. He's the Vice President of Relational Databases at AWS, Amazon Web Services, and he's taken time from his busy schedule to talk to us. So why do we have him on our show? The DBMS market is now worth $80 billion. For the last 6 years, it has witnessed double-digit growth, according to Gartner. Half of that revenue comes from fully managed databases in the cloud. Riding that wave is AWS, which is now the second largest in database revenue in Gartner's research. It is right behind Microsoft and ahead of Oracle. To understand the secret behind this meteoric rise is why we have Rahul on our show today. Ever since I've been attending AWS reInvent, I have known Rahul to be the flag bearer of the data and analytics space. All these years we've met up, he has been the person behind the analytics space, which includes EMR, data lakes, lake formation, etc. Recently, he switched his role to run the relational database engines, such as the ones that you know, Amazon Redshift, Aurora, and so on. In fact, it's interesting because this is the year that AWS is celebrating the 10th anniversary of Redshift. And Rahul himself completed 10 years last year in November. So with that, Rahul, a very warm welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Sanjeev. It's a pleasure to be here on the show with you, and thanks for the kind words and introduction. It's been fantastic to be part of what we've seen unfold in this space, and it's really great to be here talking to you today.
That is great. And Rahul, what has been your journey up to this point, getting to AWS?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I've been at AWS just over 10 years. And actually, one of the first things I worked on early in my career at AWS was Redshift as a product manager. So got to launch that at our first reInvent back in 2012. And as I've gone up, I joined as a product manager working on caching, then relational databases, then our Redshift, then moved over to run product and engineering for EMR, launched a bunch of our data lake services like Athena, Glue, Lake Formation, and then kind of worked across the portfolio, was running all of analytics for a while, and now Aurora and Redshift as primary areas that I focus on.
That is great.
Been tremendous. Yep, really fun.
Yeah, it's been quite amazing. I cannot wait to learn from your experiences. Let's start off with that. In your day-to-day world, what do you feel are some of the biggest trends in the data and analytics space these days?
So we see a number of things, as I'm sure you do, Sanjeev, when we speak with customers and look around. I think there's sort of a massive movement across the board for customers to become more data-driven. And we've also seen a market acceleration in terms of cloud adoption and migration as customers set themselves up to be more flexible and elastic, especially given what we've just kind of been through in terms of the up and down cycles as we're getting through the pandemic and the economy. I think the other thing that we see is that simplicity, ease of use, not just getting started, but ease of operations at scale, but kind of the rise of serverless. And then price performance has always been a constant, but I think it's even more of a sharper point as customers look to get more value for what they spend. And then the other big thing that we see is the need for governance and really thinking about data, how it's protected, and how customers reason about what data they have, who has access to it, and for what purpose. So those, I would say, are the big things that are going on.
These are all the topics that we want to address in this podcast. Before we go and talk about some of these trends and how AWS is handling them, if you don't mind, I want to address an 800-pound gorilla in the room.
Of course.
Okay, great. So we see almost every vendor these days that every DBMS vendor is talking about their offering that supports multiple data models, polyglot, if you may. Now we know AWS has a dozen best fit offerings, and of course, you support your strategy. But the question I have is, will AWS start adding additional data models into its existing offerings? Because that's the customers don't want sometimes to have so many database offerings.
Yeah, it's a great question, Sanjeev. And as you know, we've been and continue to be believers in providing customers with the right tool for the right job, because that's how you avoid any compromises on performance, functionality, or scale. That said, we're going to continue to focus on building best-in-class offerings. We will add richness and features to the things that we have wherever it makes sense, but we're not going to force fit things into one product if it's not the right thing for customers or doesn't give them the right value for the applications that they're trying to build. And I think one of the big advantages that we have is that we don't have to have one product that does it all, because we do have a multitude of capabilities. And so we'll continue to integrate these things when they make sense. A great example is Redshift ML, for example, where you can create a model and run inference directly from a SQL prompt in Redshift. Behind the scenes, we're actually bringing the best that SageMaker has to offer in terms of model training, automatic model development, model compilation, and then bringing that back in as a function for inference. And so we want to put more capabilities at customers' fingertips, but we're going to be flexible in terms of how we deliver that.
I see. So AWS's strategy is to increase the integration between these products and make it easier to use multiple products.
Yes, it's we will continue to provide best-in-class capabilities. Absolutely, we will integrate them so that they're easier to use together and complementary. And I think that's an area that we're seeing good traction with customers, and we'll continue to do that as it makes sense. And I think that is the thing that really reflects the reality that customers have, where if you think of the real world, you've got systems on the edge, you might have machines in factories, you might have things on mining trucks, you've got things like local zones and then regions, and you need to be able to span all of these across different use cases, from batch to streaming to SQL analytics to Spark type analytics. And so it's not really possible to build one system that caters to all of these things, and you've got to really focus on connecting the dots. And that is a big area of investment for us.
I see. That's good. Thank you so much for that.
Of course.
That clarification. While we are on this topic of some of the big rocks in the room, if I may, we've seen all these customers tell us that more than 80% of them are now using more than one cloud. There is also a perception, and I'm sure this is outdated, but there's a perception that AWS is not multi-cloud friendly. How is AWS making its product support multi-cloud?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sanjeev. And I think it's important to be precise when we talk about multi-cloud. So our customers absolutely, especially our large ones, do have workloads in multiple places, and that could be in AWS, on-prem, other providers, SaaS applications, and our services do operate with and reflect and embrace that reality. And so we have things like Athena that provides connectors for querying data in real time that might be in AWS, outside other cloud providers, other SaaS applications. We've got things like AppFlow that provides dozens of connectors to external apps, services like Glue that allow for data processing from other providers. So I think that perception is outdated. We fully recognize that customers have data all over the place, and you want to be able to catalog it, connect to it, and query it no matter where it lives. And that's a reality, and it's built into our products today, and you can expect us to continue to reflect that. I think even when customers have applications in multiple places, they typically concentrate on one. Men may have a smattering in other places, either different departments, or perhaps they bought a company. And the reason for that is it's hard to become an expert in one version of the world, let alone multiple. And then the case where we see an application that's running active across multiple providers and on-prem, that's much less common and much more specialized. And I would really question if that's the right decision for customers if they find themselves going down that path, because you can often end up in a lowest common denominator type situation and not really innovate as quickly as is possible by embracing the capabilities of your provider. So at the end of the day, I think we are meeting our customers where they are, and we'll make sure that we can operate with the topologies that they have. And these are features in production today in our platform. So I think that we'll continue to invest as it makes sense here.
I see. There's also you introduced Elastic Kubernetes Services, EKS Anywhere. How does that fit into this data and analytics landscape?
Oh yeah, that's a great observation. So EKS Anywhere is essentially allowing our EKS distribution to be run on any compute platform and be managed from the EKS management interface. And what we've done in services like EMR is we support EMR and EKS. And so for customers that have chosen to standardize on EKS for their compute environments, they can get all of the benefits of the differentiated capabilities in EMR, like performance and the latest bits, and have them run on their EKS compute clusters. And so with EKS Anywhere, customers have the opportunity to run EKS workloads anywhere that they want. And so that is absolutely a part of this. And I think you'll continue to see. Again, we will offer these capabilities. Customers will use them as and when it makes sense. And the main thing that we see from a data perspective is that customers want to have a view of their data and they want to be able to operate on it. And and there are scenarios where they want to get that data all in one place, and you want to be able to extract and copy and reformat and enrich and process. But there are scenarios where you want to be able to query it in place because you don't want to necessarily move it over, but you do want to understand what you have. And we want to and do support kind of all those use cases.
Rahul, I'm very curious to see what data and analytics products are supported by EKS Anywhere. So what you're saying is that using EKS Anywhere, I can run it on any cloud platform, and then I can run EMR on top. Can I run Aurora, Redshift, or no?
So at this point, EMR is the service that runs on EKS.
I see.
I think the others we're going to see as it makes sense for customers. I think the reason that we started with EMR is that EMR has always been very flexible in terms of the compute environment that it runs on. So started off running on EC2, added support for EKS and Fargate, and now EMR can also run completely serverless. With our other services, typically we provide them as more of a platform. So a customer connects to an endpoint that allows them to run a SQL query, say in Aurora or in Redshift. And so the question of where that's actually running hasn't been that relevant. But as it becomes relevant for customers, absolutely we'll adapt. As you know, we're always trying to pay attention to what customers are trying to accomplish.
Right. While we are on this topic of EKS Anywhere and multi-cloud, I have similar questions about AWS's support for on-premises hybrid workloads. Now, I know AWS introduced Outpost a few years ago. We can run RDS, but then you've got these products like Aurora, which has been designed very carefully for the segregation of storage and compute, and elastically spinning them. So how do you support a bigger spectrum of products on premises?
Yeah, it's as you point out, we've been investing in hybrid topologies for a long time, starting with things like VPC, Outposts, has been there. We've had the storage gateway, data sync, all kinds of products that can run in customer environments. For services that, where you're running large fleets, such as Aurora, where you've kind of got the storage separated, what we're looking to see is what's a customer really trying to accomplish with their application? So for example, do they really need a high performance Postgres endpoint and they need a performance level that can't be achieved with things like direct connect and dedicated connectivity? In those cases, given that Aurora is 100% compatible with Postgres or MySQL, customers do have options. Now, the challenge that we will have, as you point out, is that for services that are delivered as complete serverless large multi-tenant fleets, it's challenging to run those on environments where you don't have the scale that we're able to offer. And that's typically not the case in these hybrid environments. So we look at them all very carefully. Like in DynamoDB, for example, we offer DynamoDB Local, which is a library that customers can run in their environment that allows them to operate. And so Depending on the use case, we generally find we're able to work with customers to set up a topology that works for them.
Yeah.
The question of will we ever run a large multi-tenant service at scale in a customer environment? I just don't think it's necessarily possible to achieve the kind of performance SLAs that we would want without sort of understanding what the hardware is, where it's running, and how it's how it's secured and protected, and all of those pieces.
I see. That is good. Yeah, so it's interesting. The DynamoDB example is a great one. So one of the things that you mentioned earlier on when you talk about trends was the whole governance, security, and we are talking about hybrid, multi-cloud. When you have these the data elements are spread across multiple different locations. You are using multiple different products, so you get a very heterogeneous environment. How do you govern data that's moving across this heterogeneous environment and make sure the data security policies that we are applying are consistent irrespective of where the data resides?
Yeah. Sanjeev, it's a goal that I think all customers would love to achieve, which is to wave a magic wand and have one consistent set of policies for all data everywhere. I think the truth is, as you point out, it's nuanced and challenging, because when you've got this diversity of systems, forget systems that are running all over the place, even within, say, a Postgres database, a MySQL database, Dynamo, Redshift, you've kind of got different catalog and governance models, and trying to think about how to integrate them is challenging. And so, what we focused on is, you approach it in phases. What you say is, look, let me catalog what I have. And we can decide, who's allowed to access what, and what does access mean? Is it direct access? Is it access to extracts? And so on. And once you've set up those layers, then you can decide how you govern access to that data in a more fine-grained way. And so eventually what you're doing is you're tying together the access policy to the idea of users and roles and what they're allowed to do. And often what we see customers doing and what we provide support for is this idea of creating views of your data. So your data may be in a different system, but you can create a view of that data in a system where you can provide cohesive governance, and then only give people access to those views. And then that allows you to create this layer of indirection. So you don't provide direct access to, say, your operational database.
I see.
You can provide a view that's updated that you can then control and restrict for analytics or machine learning or what have you. And so I think as you look around, and you'll see, all approaches that customers taking will generally involve some layered approach like this, so that you can get to a place where you can define a boundary that you can control, and then provide cohesive governance on those pieces.
So is that by creating these views, I'm assuming materialized views, you can do, or any, my question was also on data residency, sovereignty, and what are some of the use cases that you see, and how's, let's say, Redshift handling those?
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack in your question. I think we see both types of views materialized, typically for performance, as well as live, which is, you define the view and you look at it in real time just to see what's there right now. So those kinds of things exist. And, it again depends on what the customer is trying to accomplish. And we've actually invested a ton in things like automated materialized view technology in Redshift to get smart about continuously upgrading these or updating these materialized views. And you can then provide very fine-grained access control on the views themselves that allow you to create that layer of indirection to the downstream data, and also to query data without putting undue load on the system of record, say that might be an operational database. And then you have to overlay that with, absolutely, you're right, with governance and residency, and what that means. And you have to kind of be careful and go jurisdiction by jurisdiction, because, one is, a government may define what data residency means. But then a company may also have its own policy that gets overlaid on top of that, which is, okay, the government's defined X, here's my interpretation of X, therefore this is my data policy. And you've got to be able to enable that through the systems that you provide. And so we tend to take a very hard stance in terms of cross-region data transfer. So it's not going to happen unless the customer takes an explicit action to allow it. And then, customers are then able to set up the things in the way that they need to for their businesses. So our services will support, for example, cross-region queries. You can do
I
that.
see.
But they won't do it by default. You have to explicitly allow the service to do it and explicitly set up the rules that you want. So that's part of it, is the customer responsibility, and then we provide the capabilities underneath to enable it.
Yeah. This, like you said, this is a very big topic. I'm, as you're saying this, I'm thinking about, same query returning different results depending upon which region you're in, with masking, tokenization. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can do, things today that we support in lake formation where you could have the same data set.
mhm,
It can provide and filter out different elements of the data based on the characteristics of the user or the group that they're in. So for example, for data that's in the EU, only people with an EU tag can actually see
correct.
anonymized data, but people who are non-EU might be able to see tokenized or aggregated data. And again, you just have to be very vigilant about, what is acceptable based on the jurisdiction that you're operating in, because it's not uniform across the world, and it's not uniform across customers, because customers have to decide how they're going to interpret a lot of this. It's a very dynamic landscape,
Yeah.
and and we're working closely with customers and regulators across the world to kind of decide what do we need to provide so that customers can comply with the regimes in which they need to operate.
In this scenario, there's also a huge discussion about how do you decentralize your architecture. So data mesh has been in the news a lot. In fact, there's a lot of angst around how do you deploy data mesh? How is it different from data fabric? What is data as a product? What are your views on these data mesh, data fabric, data as a product spaces?
Yeah, it's absolutely a hot topic, and I think fundamentally it's a question about how companies and customers want to think about their data. And to your point, in a decentralized world, data mesh has been a popular topic, and we've got customers like Intuit and JPMC building
Mhm.
data meshes on AWS products, and our products are designed, because they are modular and support APIs, they're designed to make it easy to set up these things. But the fundamental idea is that, a decentralized unit or domain owns their data and how that data is delivered to other consumers of that data. And so that just by definition means a decentralized model, typically with some shared tooling. And that's as much an organizational consideration as it is a technical consideration. And often, customers have to think about what does it mean for a team to own their data? How much do they need to invest in data talent to make sure that they can deliver data reliably to other parts of the organization that need it? And then, on the other side, you might have something like a fabric or a more centralized model where there is an enterprise data team that provides data to the organization.
Mhm.
And other teams can submit data to that when it's then curated, cleaned up, enriched, and then republished and shared out. And that picks a different set of trade-offs, just as you would see with any decision in business. You might get more coherence. It's easier to perhaps get a density of talent around data in the centralized team. The challenge is then that sometimes centralized teams can become bottlenecks, and teams generally have to prioritize amongst themselves in terms of who's going to get attention when. And
Yeah.
what we see at scale is generally there's the world exists as usual in the gray. There's sort of some data assets that are centralized by the organization, and then teams also have some autonomy to create their own data things, and then create standards for how these things will interface and how data might move from a leaf, say, to the center of the system, and what checks and quality requirements have to go through. So I think it's very dynamic, it's very organizational, and there's no perfect model in terms of how companies think about organizing data as an asset. But there's no question that it's something that customers are really working through.
Yeah, in fact, I see this all the time. Like when we talk about decentralization, some things are great candidates for decentralization, but some are not. If I can decentralize data products because I'm a subject matter expert in my team, I know what the product should do, and I have a product manager, all of that. But if it's like business definition, glossary, applying security, I cannot have like separate definitions and security models in different domains, So I think some things need to be centralized. So to your point, it's a very dynamic space. It's complex. There isn't a one ring to rule them all.
That's right.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Oh, it'd be nice if there was a magic answer that worked for everyone, but
right.
I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah. So, Rahul, I want to move more onto the product and technology side. So, the first question I want to ask you is, you mentioned how Redshift ML has integrated SageMaker. You can define, create, train your models in SageMaker and run it from a SQL prompt in Redshift. What about machine learning operations, ML ops, the whole process of getting this productionalizing or operationalizing? What is your view of, are those separate things or colliding?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think they're related and complementary in my views, Sanjeev. I mean, I think what we see is that one, I think machine learning is becoming pervasive, and customers want to be able to run machine learning wherever their data happens to be, and I think that's why Redshift ML has been popular. And we've got things like Neptune, our graph database, and that hooks into neural nets and machine learning as well. So that's one thing I think we'll continue to see. I think that's very tied into the ML ops side, which is, I think customers want to think about machine learning in the way they think about software development. You're going to test, you're going to develop, test, validate, deploy, measure how well it works, and iterate and repeat this cycle. And we see customers doing some similar things with models. You want to see how good a model is, you'll iterate on the model, refine the model, A/B test the model with the new one, and then decide what to put in production. And I think these are two related life cycles. And one of the reasons that we took the approach that we did is that ML ops is it's a big space, and it has a lot of specialized tooling, and you don't want to recreate that every time you want to build a different product. And so what we're trying to do is to make sure that we provide everything that's needed for really machine learning in anger in production at scale in SageMaker, and then we tap into it with the other services that we have, so customers can take advantage of everything that we're doing for the full machine learning lifecycle, from all the way from data labeling through to deploying models in production, and use that in conjunction with what they're doing elsewhere in the database and analytics stack.
I see. That makes sense. While we are talking about products, I want to ask you another question about a gorilla in the room, and this one has to do with Redshift. Redshift often is labeled as an on-prem, non-cloud native Power Excel database that cannot compete with the born in the cloud or native cloud offerings that are getting a lot of attention these days. How do you respond to that? I know this is an old school of thinking, but it's pervasive. I hear it. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so these are absolutely old tapes, Sanjeev. I mean, I think, it's just not true anymore. And I think Redshift was the first data warehouse in the cloud back in 2012. And, and it did, it did have classic MPP architecture with local storage, and that was designed for performance at the time. And over the years, what we've done is completely re-architected Redshift. And so, we've now separated storage and compute. Data is committed directly to S3. The system is elastic. We're actually the only player to offer concurrency scaling, so that, as your workload spike, we can transparently add capacity without customers having to take really any action. And, today, if you look at Redshift from a scalability perspective and a price performance perspective, especially under concurrent load, it actually performs better than anything out there in terms of value for the customer for real world workloads, or even on benchmark performance. And so this is just not true anymore. And we recently published a paper on 10 years of reinventing data warehousing, where we talk about kind of the journey that we've taken, and to say that Redshift is just old school is like saying that SQL Server is just Sybase. It's just not true anymore. There's been so much innovation and investment that's gone into evolving and adapting to meet what customers are looking to do with the system.
just recently, a few years ago, AWS introduced RA3 instance type. Can you tell us what is RA3 and why is that important in this story?
Yeah, absolutely. So the RA3 instance types are, it's a modern type where we essentially, that's where we decouple compute from storage. And so it used to be in Redshift that you would commit data to local disks in a quorum set on the cluster, and then that data would be backed up to S3. And so what we did with the RA3s was we changed the commit pipeline, and so now commit is to S3. So you've got an RPO of 0 on data, and that data is automatically available in multiple availability zones. And the other things with the RA3 is that you have extremely high network bandwidth now, and so we use local NVRAM for caching, local SSDs for caching, working set blocks, and aggressively use memory. But data is actually committed to S3. And so now you've got the data and storage compute separation. You can have elasticity that enables things like concurrency scaling. And so that was a big shifting point in terms of Redshift architecture. It's been a huge win for customers. And because of that high network bandwidth, you're able to hydrate very quickly. Like resizes or restores are super fast. If you need to replace a node, you get the working set back very quickly. And so it's been really transformative for Redshift customers.
Got it. I will put a link to the VLDB paper on Redshift in the meeting notes. So
thank you. Yeah, I'm sure folks will find that interesting. It's definitely goes into a lot of detail about what the team's been up to.
That is great. In fact, recently, just last month was the Amazon Prime Day, and I was reading up, I think there were like 300 million items that were sold, and concurrency at one point was like 100,000 items. So I'm just curious, what were some of the data and analytics products that were used to achieve this kind of high scale?
So the Prime Day, I think, was fantastic for Amazon and for customers. As you point out, sort of massive scale, and I think the stats were 100,000 items a minute at some point. And so it really runs the full range of data and analytics technologies, as you can imagine, Sanjeev. So we've got things like DynamoDB in the shopping and checkout pipeline. You've got things like Aurora and RDS in fulfillment center databases. We've got systems like Redshift and EMR and Kinesis handling telemetry and analytics, services like SageMaker and so on for personalization. So it's been just a massive usage of AWS services to power Prime Day.
That's great. And talking about this scale and the need to do analytics on data that's fresh, we also see there's a lot of focus on streaming data. In fact, the so-called real-time analytical data warehouses have been sprouting up quite frequently. We've had ClickHouse and Druid. Rockset is another one. I see some new ones coming up like StarRocks. What are some new developments in AWS to support this analytics on data as it's being generated?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're absolutely right. I think there is rapid growth in real time, and customers are really trying to speed up their data cycle. When an event happens to when they're able to do something about that event to change how their customers interact with their systems is, and then kind of closing that loop to learn from it and continue adapting and finding advantages, something customers are absolutely pushing. And we've been in streaming for ages. I think Kinesis was the first streaming service in the cloud. We've got managed Kafka, we've got Flink, and so what you're seeing from AWS is continued innovation in terms of enabling easy to use, scalable, low-cost streaming solutions for customers. And each of these support the ability to run analytics, either SQL or custom analytic programs directly on data that's streaming in real time. And then you've got kind of real-time flow of this data into systems like Aurora, Redshift, or data lakes for different types of large-scale analytics and so on. So I think we'll continue to see innovation in this area. And I think for us, really the axes of price performance, we want to make sure it's serverless so it can scale without customers having to deal with operating systems. And then continuing to focus on making it reducing the window between when an event occurs and when a customer can analyze it as much as possible.
Correct.
Kind of the key for customers here.
So are we going to see real-time ingestion into Redshift?
I believe we have this in preview already. So, that's something that absolutely we've been working on, and it's something that that matters for customers.
I see. That is great. And how is data quality being handled? What are some of AWS products that help ensure that we have good quality of data?
So data quality is, it's a big another one of these spaces like governance. It's a big deal in a big space, and for us, the Glue data catalog and lake formation are areas that we've spent a bunch of investment thinking about data quality and how it matters. We've open sourced DQ, which is a data quality library that we use in Amazon that's Python based, and really the goal is to help customers be able to define the quality rules that matter for their data pipeline, so that wherever their data happens to be, they also have indicators of is that data valid, and where did this data come from, and where is it being used? So kind of that quality lineage governance set of things go together, and they generally, you want to have them available wherever customers have data at scale.
Right. One more topic that's trending these days is this whole idea of data sharing exchanges, marketplaces. So instead of having to ETL stuff and secure FTP or just sharing data, how is AWS? What services can we?
So we've got investments across the board in data sharing. We talked a little bit about enabling sharing through Glue and lake formation and S3 for things like EMR and Athena and Redshift consumption. Redshift, we announced data sharing, which supports Redshift to Redshift data sharing, and this can be done cross-account, cross-cluster, and cross-region as well. And because of the RA3s and data being stored on S3, you actually put no demands on the producer if you've got multiple consumers, and so it enables customers to set up these hub and spoke or mesh type topologies as well. And then we've got integration into the AWS Data Exchange, ADX, to allow customers to search for, discover data sets, and actually share them from the providers of those data sets and consume them in their own applications. And so you'll continue to see this get more pervasive across our services. It's been really popular in terms of adoption for customers. And the interesting thing we're seeing is it's not just about sharing across companies, but also within companies. So you've got departments sharing with each other. And what you get is the ability to publish data and have that be consumed without impacting the environment that's producing the data. And then you have the ability to set up multiple consumers, each at their own scale with their own use cases, so they can do what they need to do without bumping into anyone. And this is a big improvement from the last version of the world where you had to use the cluster at off hours, or you were throttled down because you couldn't afford to get in the way of production SLAs and so on. And so I think it's really unlocked agility for customers. And because it's shared, you're always operating on data that's fresh. You're not operating on a prior slice of the world. And so it's just provided agility and cost benefits and freshness benefits for customers.
Do I have to be a Redshift customer to access data through the exchange?
No. So the data exchange allows sharing. The Redshift sharing is a value add. So if you are a Redshift customer, you can get live transactional data sharing. But it also supports really arbitrary consumption of data, either through files or through data on S3 for data lakes. And so it's really quite open and modular. But what we're finding is that customers really like the ability to just connect a Redshift share to an ADX data set and start consuming it. And now with Redshift serverless, you don't even need to have a Redshift cluster. You can just spin it up fly,
Right.
it'll go to idle when you're not using it. And so
Okay.
it's really created
Right.
value for customers that way.
And Redshift serverless went GA just a couple of weeks ago, correct?
It was that's right. It was at the New York Summit. Just 3 weeks ago. So
3 weeks ago. That is great. Yeah, very nice. Okay. So we've talked about cost. You mentioned cost a few times. How do the costs compare for Redshift these days? And the second question I have is customers are also looking for price predictability. So what are some FinOps capabilities that you have introduced?
absolutely. Redshift has always really had a strength on the price performance side, and in the cloud, price performance is really a dial, right? You have a slider, and you can kind of choose to optimize for performance, or for if you're satisfied with performance, you can get that same level of performance with lower cost as we continue to improve and innovate. And so I think this has been a real strength for Redshift, and especially as we've kind of seen some tightening in certain parts of the economy, it's become much more top of mind for customers. And price predictability and exceptional value for money has always been a big part of what has been a reason customers have selected Redshift, and that continues to be true. And as I mentioned, not only is Redshift outperforming other major players on kind of single stream benchmark performance in kind of the common benchmarks, but in the real world where customers are running at high concurrency, the Redshift advantage just goes way up, I think, in terms of value for customers. And customers have the option of provisioning in predictable increments as a number of nodes, and with serverless they can set min and max values for providing upper bounds, and then we will scale down when idle. So they always have the ability to predict what they're going to spend, and then you've got multiple constructs or like reserved instances or spot to kind of further optimize. And then we also continue to invest in things like Graviton, which is just better price performance out of the box for moving your workloads. And as we improve our hardware generations, customers get those benefits just by staying on the latest pieces. So massive set of investments in both software and hardware to deliver better price performance. And then from a management perspective, we've kind of created multiple layers of things. So within the service, we've got an idea called work groups, where you can set up effectively a sandbox in which you can decide what users, what data, how much budget, who's allowed to do what. And then at the AWS level, we've got things like AWS budgets, tags, where you can tag all the elements of an application across multiple services with a particular tag, so you can see how much is this app costing me across, say, Aurora and Redshift and S3 and other things. And with budgets, customers can decide what actions they want to take as they kind of approach the budget limits that they've set. Do they want to set alerts? Do they want to throttle, and so on? And so, this has been a big part of how we've thought about enabling customers to get control of, to optimize costs in the cloud. And then, the next layer is also, especially at large customers, they want to think about chargebacks. So if you've got central technology models, you want to know how much is division A consuming versus division B. And with our tag-based allocation, we're able to get super granular on all those pieces for customers.
That is good. So Rahul, we've talked about quite a bit about Redshift and a little bit about Aurora. What other products do you support? Are there other ones that you could tell us about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in my current role on Aurora and Redshift, as we've talked about, QLDB, which is our ledger database. And so the idea with QLDB is that you're able to have a verifiable chain of all changes made to data and be able to query it with a SQL interface. And so, we've seen customers like the UK equivalent of the DMV, for example, to track licenses and titles for cars. They want this unbroken chain of who's been able to do what and how have things changed hands. And with QLDB, you kind of get this ability to verify cryptographically the entire set of change streams behind a particular record. So it's a very innovative take on essentially turning a database inside out and focusing on the chain stream and then the view of the database of the queryable, rather than the typical other approach where you update data and then you generate a chain stream. So, we find that's a pretty interesting and innovative area for customers for a set of use cases that are hard to really guarantee in different environments. And then prior to this was working across the entire analytics space, and so that was Redshift, EMR, OpenSearch, Athena, Glue, Lake Formation, AppFlow, and so just a broad spectrum of capabilities for customers. And I've been lucky to played a role in all the products that we've worked on over the years.
Right. And OpenSearch is interesting because it's also a big effort from AWS to get into the open source space, right? So it's the Elasticsearch or Elastic open source version.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, OpenSearch was something that we felt compelled to do. I think it was an important open source project after that license changed. We felt it was important to be able to support customers and continue to provide an open source Apache licensed version of that. And so, it's not a step we took lightly, but it's one that we felt was important for customers in the community. And so that's a fully open project. It's Apache 2 license. We've got external folks contributing to it. Oracle uses OpenSearch for their managed OpenSearch service, so they're a customer of the OpenSearch distribution. And then we obviously offer a managed service in that regard. So we'll continue to invest in keeping that project healthy and continue contributing to that and encouraging broad community contributions as well. So it's a very active project, and we're pleased with how that's been received and the engagement that we're getting. And then in parallel, we continue to invest and contribute to the important open source communities that we participate in, whether that's Redis or Spark or Kafka or Trino or Presto or HBase. So we're active contributors and participants, Iceberg, Hoodie, you name it. So I think it's a really important capability for customers, and we want to make sure that we're good contributors in these ecosystems.
That is great. And I think that's also important for listeners to know, because this is also a change that we have seen in AWS, where AWS is now more actively participating in the open source space. So
yeah, absolutely. And thanks for mentioning that. It has been I think we've always been participants, but we've definitely have stepped it up a lot more. And it's been great to see folks on the team get committer status in projects like Iceberg and Hoodie and Redis over the years. And so, we're excited to continue to do more in this area.
That's great. Rahul, I have one last question from the technology side before we shift gears and talk about some leadership topics. I'm curious, what are some unique or unexpected use cases that you have come across of your products?
Oh, that's such a great question. So, some fun ones over the years. Let's see. So one that I thought was great. I don't remember. This was a few years back, but there had been some folks that had hacked into one of the online press release websites, and they were able to look at earnings releases before they were made public to the market and trade ahead of them. And so, and one of our customers, FINRA, is the U.S. equities regulator, so they regulate 99% plus of U.S. equities trading. And they were actually using our products to find these folks, and they detected this bad activity in the market and were able to figure out who these folks were and prosecute. So that was super fun to be part of that. I think in the in the pandemic era, folks like Moderna and Bayer were big users of Redshift and Glue and Lake Formation to try and get essentially you had to bring these complex supply chains together, get a single view of what was happening, and really get rapid cycle iteration. And so we're grateful to have played a small role in allowing those companies to bring vaccines to market and then to rapidly ramp up ventilator supply. We got customers like NG in Europe, major provider of sustainable energy, and they're using data and analytics to try and help customers optimize their renewable consumption and to optimize energy usage. F1 is another great example. It's fun for me. I love things with engines in them. So, and I don't know if you follow, but a lot of the racing this year, you're seeing a lot more overtaking in F1, and a lot of this was done by thinking about how to design the cars so that you could drive close to each other without losing downforce, so to keep speeds high. And that required ML and HPC and fluid dynamic modeling, all done using AWS analytics and ML technologies.
Wow.
So it's just, I'm always amazed by what customers come up with in terms of ways to apply the things that we build. It makes it really fun.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for that. That was I didn't know about this F1. FINRA has been one of my favorite use cases for many, many years now. So I love what they're doing. So changing tracks here. You joined in November 2011 as an L6, and now you are an L10.
Right.
Been quite a journey. Would love to hear what are some of your lessons learned, something that the listeners can learn and emulate your successes, maybe. So if you don't mind. Yeah.
No, thank you for putting me on the spot, Sanjeev. So, I think, look, I've been super lucky. I've had definitely great leaders and managers that looked out for me. And also, I have to say, I was lucky to come into the data space in the cloud at a time when it was really beginning to take off. And, I think in my, I was at least, smart enough to recognize I'd gotten lucky to be in a great place and, really hunkered down and tried to deliver as much value as I can. I think that, the things I would say to folks are, one, just really think about how you can make a contribution to your customers, to the team around you, to other folks. And really, if you can, what I tried to do was to show up to any situation and try and leave it a little better off than it was before I got there. And I think if you're able to do that, whether or not it's in your direct area, I think you'll find that you're able to make progress and you end up adding value. Yeah, so that's one. I think the second thing is you've got to be willing to just keep an open mind and to listen to signals from your customers, from the field, from others on the team, no matter how senior or junior, about things that maybe represent the fact that the world isn't exactly what you thought it was. And you should try and understand anytime you have this disconnect between what you're hearing and your mental model of the world. And the way we talk about that at Amazon is that, we measure a ton of things. We like to, we like to be data driven, but we also pay a lot of attention to anecdotes. And anecdotes could be, hey, a customer tweeted that this wasn't working. And, anytime the anecdotes and data disagree, typically the anecdotes are right. It generally represents a blind spot in our systems. And so, what I encourage folks to do is to just pay attention to things that don't seem as they should be, and poke until you figure out exactly what's going on there, because typically it means you have something to uncover that you're not realizing. So once you understand that, you've got to be willing to change your mind and adapt and iterate. And, I think, it's one of the dangers as you gain experiences, you tend to pattern match a little too much, and you want to be able to make sure that you're not missing that this time something actually might be different from what you've seen before. So I think building on the experience that you gain, but being humble and open to new signals, I think is super important. And then just adapt.
Wow, that is great. So be in the moment, be open to what's going on around you, and listen actively, and and stay a step ahead.
That's the goal. We don't always pull it off, but
yes, yeah. So one final question. Tell us something about you that the world generally does not know.
Wow, there's so much. I'm a pretty private person, but I could give you a couple of nuggets. But
Okay.
one is that I absolutely love airplanes, and I'm studying to get a pilot's license finally after as far back as I have memories. I've wanted to do that. And so
Oh,
that's
wow.
something that hopefully this year, before the end of the year, I should have a private pilot's license. So that'll be super fun. And then the other fact that people seem to find pretty interesting is that, I've done probably about a dozen marathons and an Ironman, which is still hard to believe that I've done those things. But yes, that's another thing. So I've enjoyed subjecting myself to hours of pain
Yeah.
across the finish line.
Which means you have to practice every day. You have to run.
Yeah, the Ironman was, it's a 13.5 hour event, 2 mile swim, 100-mile bike ride, and a marathon. And yeah, you're training 6 days a week for
I
a
see.
month.
It's amazing. You found time for all of that. So
Yeah, it's one of these things. I think you make time for what's important. So you
yes,
just gotta
yeah,
line up that list and then
yeah,
adjust.
that is great. Once again, thank you so much for coming on this show and educating us on all the wonderful things that are happening. Hopefully, I'll see you later this year at reInvent. And it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Same here, Sanjeev. It's great to chat with you. Congrats on your entrepreneurial endeavor as well, and definitely look forward to seeing you in Vegas.
Thank you.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone. See you. Bye.
Bye.